God and Science by John W. Dawley. Copyrighted by the John W. Dawley Trust. Narrated by Michael Drew. Chapter 12. Plagues in Egypt. The biblical record of Moses' work is so comprehensive and detailed that to do it full justice would require hundreds of pages. Therefore the author proposes to deal only with three of the most important events in this record, namely the plagues in Egypt, the crossing of the Red Sea, and Moses' several ascents of Mount Sinai, where he is supposed to have received the Ten Commandments and also instructions as to the building of the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant. Moses' rod. After his experience at Mount Horeb, Moses returned to Egypt, fully conscious of his obligation to free his fellow countrymen from bondage and convey to them his newly awakened sense of God's true nature as I am that I am. He was told to take his rod, which had now become a definite asset, in his hand, and that with it he must do signs. From now on, this measuring rod was to Moses what an ordered spiritual understanding of God and reality should be to each one of us, and we should never tackle Egypt without it. In the East, the sheep used to pass under the rod, and the shepherd numbered them. All divine thoughts are numbered, that is, measured or ordered by the perfect sevenfold statement contained in the days of creation. These days symbolize an infinite range of spiritual ideas. But just as the Scripture says, the very hairs on your head are all numbered, so every idea has its specific identity and individuality, and is governed by the divine rod or rule. Moses' measuring rod would naturally have included a perfect understanding of God's nature, as firstly the infinite intelligence or divine mind, manifesting itself as intelligent spiritual thought; secondly, the only substance or infinite spirit, forever separating the true from the false; and thirdly, the one divine identity or infinite soul, forever defining all ideas as inseparable from God. Later that same measuring rod became in Jesus' hands the complete sevenfold understanding and proof of the divine nature, whereby all men could know and use absolute truth with confidence and certainty. John, the Revelator, wrote of the woman who brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, the same symbol again. A rod of iron typifies that which is unchangeable and unbreakable. Human experiences countenances deviation in spiritual matters, but the divine rod cannot be bent or altered in its infinite categories of divine measurement. Rather does it exalt human experience to bring it into line with absolute truth. The story of the plagues, an illustration of the exact spiritual way of salvation. And now we come to the story of the plagues, which were visited on Egypt because of Pharaoh's refusal to set the children of Israel free. This story of the plagues has always been a difficult one for the theologian to explain, and by unbelievers it has always been regarded as mythological, although several of the visitations can be explained in part by natural phenomena occurring at certain times of the year. However, the fact that the prophetic writers depicted these plagues as happening one after the other at Moses' instigation must indicate that they had a deeper import than merely natural phenomena taking place at particularly convenient times to fit in with the narrative. There must surely be a spiritual and truly scientific interpretation of these happenings, which formed a prelude to the dramatic incident of the Israelites' departure from Egypt. The author is convinced that there is such an interpretation, and that when understood it presents a very important aspect of the metaphysical system of the Bible and its use to mankind. First, let us consider the fact that no thinker is surprised when he finds that the ordered ideas of any serious subject must be used specifically, as a rod, to correct in detail the numberless mistakes caused by imperfect understanding of the particular subject. For instance, in arithmetic it requires the fact that 4 plus 4 equals 8 to correct the mistake that 4 plus 4 equals 9. The calculation that 3 plus 3 equals 6 is a true one, but nevertheless it will not correct 4 plus 4 equals 9 specifically. Are we to believe that in the infinite categories of divine metaphysics there's less accuracy and system than there is in mathematics, and that they are therefore not capable of dealing accurately with the manifold errors of the carnal mind? When the New Testament declares that perfect love casteth out fear, it is stating an eternal spiritual fact, which is as exact and truly scientific as the mathematical fact that 2 plus 2 equals 4 annuls any error that the sum of 2 and 2 is not 4. The divine law is that nothing will cast out fear but the right idea of love. The process of knowing the truth so accurately and exactly that one can intelligently correct the myriad errors of the human mind constitutes the operation of a comprehensive and intelligent system of true salvation and divine metaphysics, and we shall eventually find it to be such in our daily life and experience. The Old Testament writers realized the exactness and precision of spiritual things, and expressed this in the accurate symbols of their own day. For instance, Isaiah, using the ploughman's work as a symbol, says, "For the fitches are not threshed with a threshing instrument, neither is a cartwheel turned about upon the cummin. But the fitches are beaten out with a staff, and the cummin with a rod. Bread-corn is bruised, because he will not ever be threshing it, nor break it with the wheel of his cart, nor bruise it with his horsemen. This also cometh forth from the Lord of hosts, which is wonderful in counsel, and excellent in working." Again, Isaiah gives us a sense of the exact exchanging of the pains of mortal existence for the joys of spiritual sense, when he says, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, to give unto them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness." Spiritual reality is and must always be recognized as the most precise, ordered, and scientific conception in the world. In other words, it is ever an exact measuring rod. Bearing this in mind, the author puts forward the proposition that in this 3,000 years of Bible history, the prophetic writers used the symbol of the plagues visited upon Egypt to show mankind in every age how the definiteness and certainty of divine ideas, operating in an infinite calculus of reality, exposes and destroys the so-called calculus of materiality with its myriad falsities, and this is the most exact and detailed manner. 7 times Moses was told by God, according to the Bible record, to approach Pharaoh and demand of him, "Let my people go." But each time it is said, in the symbolic way in which the prophetic writers stated these things, that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, so that he would not let the children of Israel go, even though Moses warned him of the plagues that would come upon the land as a consequence of his refusals. Is there not a striking analogy in human experience today? Pharaoh is a symbol for all time of mortal sense, which binds us with disease, fear, sorrow, sin, war, and so on. Spiritual sense, ever available to each one of us, is always urging, "Let my people go," and spiritual sense, armed with the rod of scientific spiritual understanding, has the power to set men free. But unfortunately, we listen to Pharaoh more often than not. We doubt whether there is power in spiritual scientific thinking, and so we reap the results of our unwillingness to progress. The plagues certainly visit us until we give up our belief in the false gods which ignorance and materialism impose on us. The way out is always an exact way, as the Bible record shows. It has been generally supposed that there were 10 plagues, but many authorities agree that there were 7. The Century Bible, for instance, writes of these plagues as 10 is a round number and fairly common. The editor of the Pentateuch probably arranged to have 10 plagues, but the later inspired writers were not interested in the number. The 10 plagues is not a scriptural phrase. Taking, in the first instance, the present arrangement of the text, just as it stands, we get the following table, showing which plagues were present in which sources. Please refer to the printed chart. But if the reader will refer to the detailed notes on the various plagues, he will find that there are strong grounds for believing that Priestley's lice is only another version of Yahweh's flies. We might call them both vermin. That Yahweh's murrin is a variant of Priestley's boils and blains, we might put pestilence, and that the section of Yahweh at present connected with Elohistic darkness had nothing whatever to do originally with any such plague, there being no darkness in Yahweh. The editor of the Century Bible's Exodus considers the J, or Yahweh document, to be the most reliable, and this document records 7 plagues. 1. The Nile smitten. 2. The plague of the frogs. 3. The plague of the flies. 4. The murrin of the cattle. 5. The plague of the hail. 6. The plague of the locusts. And 7. The slaying of the firstborn. To regard the plagues of Egypt as actual visitations on the unfortunate Egyptians, who were probably no worse than the general run of Israelites, would be to ask mankind to accept the concept of a deliberately cruel and merciless God. This no righteous thinker can do. As we've already seen, the root notions of reality were symbolized by the 7 days of creation and put into a calculus of spiritual thought and idea by the inspired writers of the Bible. Moreover, each of these root notions, although we have endeavored to epitomize them in a few specific terms, see Appendix 1, was designed to convey a vast range of spiritual ideas. It would seem in the same way the prophetic writers epitomized the paganism, idolatry, superstition, and gross materiality of Egypt in the 7 symbolic incidents of the plagues. 7 plagues, although in a more vicious form, are used in Revelation also as a symbol to describe the workings of the one evil, the carnal mind and its effect, mortality. It will be found that each of the plagues described in Exodus is an analysis of the falsity of specific Egyptian gods, and the consequent destruction in thought of popular belief in them. The worship of false gods was rampant in Egypt. In fact, the Encyclopaedia Britannica has remarked, "Truly it might have been said in ancient Egypt, of the making of gods there was no end." What could have been more natural and more in accord with their method of symbolizing divine revelation than for the prophetic writers to indicate that Moses used the 7-fold or perfect system of spiritual and metaphysical symbolism given in the seed plot of Genesis to break up and destroy the false faith of his fellow countrymen in the gods of Egypt? It is certain that Moses could never have led the Hebrews into the wilderness to worship Yahweh unless he had first destroyed their faith in the paganism of ancient Egypt. It would seem that Moses accomplished this by setting about the task systematically and scientifically, in the only way possible, that is, through an enlightened educational process. Moses had to accomplish in that day what is now become an essential in our age, the deliverance of mankind from its reliance on things material. He enlightened the thoughts of his fellow men through exact spiritual teaching. He gave them a foretaste of the commandments and of that rod of iron which was to rule all men. How long this took, no one knows. Must we not honestly face the fact in this scientific era of ours that vague and emotional theories of God and of reality are not capable of meeting and destroying the plagues of today, which claim to oppose and defile all that is good, true, substantial, and worthwhile? Spiritual, scientific education alone can bring this age out of the darkness and perplexity induced by myriad false materialistic theories. Are there no prophets today to arise and thunder forth such a message? It is certain that the intelligent spiritual and metaphysical system which lies within the Bible, and which has been outlined in this book, would radically change the course of human history, if understood, lived, and loved. Such a system can never rob man of deep spiritual sentiment, but rather does it culture immeasurably his sense of spiritual values. The author knows little or nothing about music, but he loves to hear good music. It thrills him. Is he to believe, though, that the transient emotional thrill he gains from listening to music is of more value than the deep musical culture of the trained musician? The Bible is a scientific book. A system of divine metaphysics is laid out in its first chapter, and this system, symbolized in various ways and at different levels, permeates it from cover to cover. The prophets knew that spiritual reality was ordered and scientific, and they wrote their documents accordingly. Jesus knew that the Old Testament told a spiritual and scientific story, and that he had come to fulfill, and not to destroy, the law and the prophets. Hence the statement, beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them in all the Scriptures the things concerning himself. The metaphysical and scientific understanding of God will not rob men of their present sense of God. It will strengthen, develop, deepen, and clarify every right concept of God and the Bible. Hence Moses, at this point, was instructed to gather the elders of Israel together and to tell them that there was no new God that he was presenting to them, but that the irresistible development of the Christ idea was revealing the one and only God in a clearer and fuller light. This constant appearing of the right idea of God can never cease as long as there is a divine Christ forever translating God to men. Spiritual thinkers and idealists must now meet the challenge of organized materiality, and they can meet it only with a Christianity which is based on holy spiritual and scientific premises. Such an understanding of God must enable the individual and mankind in general, scientifically and systematically, first to analyze evil, then to expose it, and finally to eradicate it altogether. Moses used this very threefold process to lead the Hebrews out of the paganism and idolatry of Egypt, and this is the stupendous spiritual and scientific destruction of evil which has been termed the plagues of Egypt. It is evident, then, that Moses employed absolute spiritual fact in an ordered way to destroy every detail of the paganism of Egypt, just as one would use specific facts in mathematics to destroy specific mistakes. Moses' way was, in a degree, the same exact and ordered way that you and I must adopt today. The only promised land which holds any real promise for the individual is some measure of attainment of the mind of Christ. To reach that promised land, we must start by understanding the days of creation, or revelation, and all that these days imply. We must also understand the deep spiritual significance of that divine system which was once symbolized by the numbers 1, 3, 4, 7, 10, and 12, and also by many other symbols. Then we can deal with our Egypt and reach the promised land. The divine method of salvation was definite in Moses' day, as indeed it is now and always will be. It's interesting to note that at first the magicians of Egypt claimed to do the same signs as Moses and Aaron, but eventually their efforts failed. Processes of the human mind and systems of organized mental suggestion, such as hypnotism, mesmerism, and necromancy, claim today, as of old, to be able to counterfeit the results of spiritual thought and power, but inevitably they break down. So the scriptural writers depict the magicians as successfully counterfeiting the signs of Moses and Aaron up to the third plague. After that point they could do no more, because at the third stage progressive thought must be exalted and identified with God, or it becomes powerless. It is also a striking fact that at first Aaron used the rod up to the third plague, but after that it was either God who produced or removed the phenomena, or Moses who used the rod. Aaron seems to stand for the limitations of organized religion. Thirdly, it is interesting to note that after the third plague the Israelites ceased to be affected by the disastrous happenings. At this third stage, where thought is identified with God, there's always definite spiritual progress. The dry land appears, and this is very marked throughout the 3,000 years of the scriptural record. Let us then consider the 7 plagues one by one, and see whether they can reasonably be regarded as counterfeiting the 7 days of creation and their numerals of thought and idea. Let us also see how the ordered destruction of the 7 plagues can take place in our individual experience. Let it be remembered that we are touching but lightly on the story of the plagues. There is much detail in it which it does not seem possible to examine within the compass of this book. The first plague, the Nile turned to blood. The first plague was the turning of the water of the river of Egypt, the Nile, into blood. The Nile was worshipped as the all-important creative factor in Egypt. In that desert land, nothing could grow or bring forth without the constant irrigation by the waters of the Nile. The Nile, therefore, was a symbol of creative power. This particular form of paganism regarded the waters of the Nile as inducing mortal creation. It will be remembered that the first day of creation began thus: "And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, Let there be light, and there was light." If we turn to Appendix 1, we shall see that this first day is epitomized as beginning, as origin, as creative power or revelation. When Moses raised his rod and the river, the water of the Nile, was turned into blood, this symbolized the exposure of the fact that the worshipping of a false creative faculty as the basis of mortal life leads to death. Is this not the first divine fact that we must acknowledge if we desire to come out of bondage to materiality, namely, that there is one cause or origin of all things, and that is divine mind? Without intelligent spiritual thought, no worthwhile activity can begin or grow. The second plague, the frogs. The second plague was the superabundance of frogs. They came up out of the river and entered into their bedchambers, their kneading troughs, and indeed everywhere. The frog was regarded in Egypt as the symbol of fecundity. It is a recognized fact that the Israelites, under the influence of Egyptian thought, were constantly indulging in fertility cults. In the book of Revelation, the frog is used as a symbol of that which is unclean. John writes, "I saw 3 unclean spirits, like frogs, come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet." It will be remembered that the second day of creation, or revelation, was portrayed thus: "And God said, Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." The second day also conveys the true idea of birth and of purity. See Appendix 1. May not the second step out of bondage, therefore, necessitate the willingness to be born again, as Jesus put it, to be born of the Spirit? In our day we should probably state this requirement in these words: after we have seen that mind is the origin of all things, the demand comes to us to appreciate the nature of that mind, to see that the divine mind is not both immortal and mortal, eternal and temporal, good and bad, but spiritual, immortal, eternal, and good alone. This divine mind can only beget pure thoughts. God is of purer eyes than to behold evil, and cannot look on iniquity. Would not an understanding of this spiritual fact constitute a new birth in our efforts to free ourselves from everyday Egyptian bondage? The third plague, the lice and the flies. As has already been explained, the third plague really consisted of 2 incidents which are regarded as identical: the plague of lice and the plague of flies. The Hebrew word used here merely means swarms, and many of the authorities believe that the plague was of beetles. In any case, whether it was of flies or beetles, they symbolized the preying, corrupt nature of what we term sin. The record states that the land was corrupted by reason of the swarm of flies. Jesus described the devil as a liar and the father of it. The scriptural term sin translates the Hebrew word meaning missing the mark. That is what a liar or a sinner does. He misses the mark, the true standard. There is nothing definite about missing the mark. Rather, it is a lack of true identification. And when sin runs riot, it misses the mark, swarms over everything, and corrupts all that it touches. Again, reference to Appendix 1 will show that the third day of creation is characterized by sinlessness and incorporeality. Moreover, on that day the identity of God's ideas become definite. The third day of creation was described thus, and God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. Here, then, is the third stage of our journey. As we see the ordered purity and onlyness of the one mind, this sense of onlyness develops in our thought until we realize that it embraces our whole being. In other words, that we are one with God, identified with God. Can we then miss the mark? Will not this definiteness of spiritual reality, this recognition of our true identity, arrest in their march any swarms of corrupt, evil thoughts and temptations that would try to defile our spiritual consciousness? From then on, it will be remembered, the plagues no longer affected the Israelites, nor could the magicians emulate the works of Aaron and Moses. When the dry land of a definite understanding of God appears, we are able to deal with the errors of the carnal mind impersonally, and without being overwhelmed by them in the process. Moreover, mystical and indefinite systems of thought cease to be of value in our eyes. They are seen to be powerless. The fourth plague, the murrain and the boils. The fourth plague also consisted of two incidents. The plague of murrain visited on the Egyptian cattle, and which caused death to them, and the plague of boils and blains visited both on the cattle and on men. This undoubtedly foreshadowed the destruction of the animal principle, the idealizing of animals as symbols of deities. The worship of the bull, for instance, was an outstanding feature of Assyrian and Egyptian religion. Animistic religion, the belief of indwelling spirits in men and beast, formed the basis of Egyptian worship, and it's noticeable that it was on both men and beasts that the plague of boils and blains was visited. Later, with the Israelites, animal worship again became quite prominent. They worshipped the golden calf, and in the sanctuaries of Dan and Bethel, this false worship was reinstated. It counterfeited the one God and his omnipotence. The fourth plague indicated that the infinite God cannot be circumscribed in man or beast. The attempt to include the one infinite infinity is always paganism and disrupts all true government. It will be remembered that the fourth day of creation was depicted thus, and God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven, to divide the day from the night. And let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years." These two lights, as we have seen, signify the one infinite and its reflection. The sun, as the centre of the heavenly system, is reflected by its system, but never included in it. This fact was used in the fourth day of creation to symbolize that there is only one true government, one divine power, and that man reflects this infinity but has no underived power. Reference to Appendix 1 will show that this fourth day, or period, is characterized as spiritual power, system, and government. Having identified ourselves with the one mind, we begin to realize in this fourth stage that of our own selves we can do nothing. We find that power does not exist in matter, in man, or in animal qualities, and we realize that this one mind is the divine principle of the universe, of all things, and that its operation with power is imperative. The fifth plague, the hail. The fifth plague was the plague of hail. Hailstorms are rare in Egypt, but cause much devastation, for the nature of hail is that it is irresistible and sweeps all before it. This seems to be particularly true of the hail described here. This teeming and devastating plague of hail was certainly a counterfeit of the abundance and multiplication of the spiritual idea, as conveyed by the fifth day, or period in Genesis, and symbolized thus. And God said, Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. Reference to Appendix 1 will show that this fifth day, or numeral of thought, is characterized by multiplication, and also by that sense of love of which Jesus spoke when he declared, Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. There is an element of cruelty about hail. It has no mercy, but just beats down everything, man, cattle, crops, trees, and everything upon the earth. Here, in the fifth stage, then, is introduced an appreciation of the nature of the divine power. We begin to see that it is not cruel, unmerciful, and relentless, but that it is a loving, beneficial entity, which does not deprive us of anything worth having, but rather brings into our lives an abundance of all that is good, substantial, real, and eternal. The sixth plague, the locusts and the darkness. The sixth plague again consists of two incidents, the plague of locusts and the plague of darkness. The locusts fly over the land in such masses that their appearance is often like a big black cloud, and so it is believed that these two plagues were confused, and that in actual fact they were one plague. Just as the Israelites were not affected by the last two plagues, so during the plague of darkness all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings, in their consciousness. Jesus said, Ye are the light of the world, and the fullness of the light of revelation came on the sixth day of creation, of which it was said, So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Reference to Appendix 1 will show that this sixth day, or period, is characterized by man and all that constitutes the true man. Consciousness, health, sonship, and so on. This man, both male and female, is given dominion over all things. So, in this sixth stage, we realize our dominion, and we are no longer content to endure the bondage of mortal sense. We are not man in darkness now, but enlightened man, conscious of our rights as God's image and likeness. Mass mesmerism, as typified by the locusts, the darkness of ignorance, can no longer fool us, for we have worked our way scientifically, step by step, out of the thraldom of the material senses. The final stage is at hand. The seventh plague, the slaying of the firstborn. And so we come to the seventh plague, which was the slaying of the firstborn of Egypt, symbolizing the complete destruction and annihilation in the thought of the Hebrews of the essence of Egyptian paganism and idolatry, and the establishment in their thought of holiness, the sense of the seventh day, or Sabbath. The observance of the Sabbath became one of the outstanding religious tenets of the Hebrews, and it symbolized that seventh day when God rested from all his work. The seventh day, as will be seen from reference to Appendix 1, indicates the complete perfection and fulfillment of the divine plan, from everlasting to everlasting. It is the day when inspired thought is no longer burdened with a sense of struggle to overcome materiality, but rather rests in the infinite perfection of the completeness of the plan of love. Naturally, this exalted state of consciousness would leave nothing that could oppose divine reality. It would forever annihilate every vestige of materiality and paganism, and thus destroy the firstborn of Egypt, the very essence of superstition. The seventh day in the ordered journey out of Egypt comes when we realize that that which seemed the firstborn to material sense, namely a mortal concept of existence, with all its false gods of fear, sin, disease, and so on, has been destroyed. Spiritual sense is now our firstborn, and with this knowledge we can partake of the Passover. That is, we can pass over from a material sense of things to the spiritual sense, and thus begin to learn God aright. It is more than interesting to note that the celebration of the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread is itself described in a sevenfold order of progressive spiritual thought corresponding to the days of creation. Briefly, the 12th chapter of Exodus gives these 7 definite stages as follows. 1. This was to be the beginning of months, the first month, to the Israelites. 2. The lamb used at the paschal meal was to be without blemish. That is, it was to have the purity of the second day, the second numeral of thought. It was also to be kept from the 10th to the 14th day, that is, for 4 days, indicating its assimilation into the ordered fourfold calculus of spirit. 3. The houses of the Israelites were to be identified by striking the blood on the 2 side posts and on the lintel of their doors. This sign would guarantee their safety. Moreover, the lamb was to be eaten with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs. The third period of translation may sometimes be bitter to material sense, but it also brings joy of soul. 4. The command was to eat it with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand. The people of Israel were to be obedient and ready to act as one having authority. That night the Infinite One was to be known as executing judgment against all the gods of Egypt. Moses, through the most spiritual, scientific, and comprehensive process of enlightenment and teaching, was leading the Israelites out of the bondage, the superstition, of Egypt and away from all false gods, destroying in their thought and experience all belief in such gods. This was his great achievement. The people were told to keep this day a feast to the Lord throughout their generations. The absolute obedience to God and the willingness to overcome materiality through the ordered periods of revelation was to be an ordinance forever. And so it will be to all men. 5. The 5th stage was the eating of unleavened bread for 7 days, symbolizing the complete laying down of the mortal concept. 6. The 6th step was that Moses gave instructions for the feast to be celebrated at once. All the provisions of this deeply symbolic ritual are then repeated, just as the full sense of all the days of creation can be discerned in the 6th day of the compound idea, man. Isaiah later epitomized as follows the great spiritual fact that true manhood embraces all ideas. And a man shall be an hiding place from the wind, and a convert from the tempest, as rivers of water in a dry place, as the shadow of a great rock in a weary land. 7. The climax of this wonderful Passover came at midnight, the hour when the bridegroom came in the parable of the 10 virgins. The children of Israel left Egypt at this point. From then on, the essence of idolatry, the firstborn of Egypt, was dead to the inspired thought of the Hebrews. Moses had analyzed, exposed, and destroyed the whole gamut of materialism, symbolized by the plagues. No longer were the children of Israel in bondage to paganism and idolatry, and so Moses could take them into the wilderness and there establish, little by little, the worship of one God, Yahweh. Each one of us will have to celebrate this feast of unleavened bread, and we shall celebrate it constantly when we understand and use the sevenfold symbolization of the ideas of God as they combine in a perfect 4-dimensional calculus of reality, known as the Word, the Christ, Christianity, and science. This is the bedrock plan of salvation on a truly spiritual and scientific basis. This plan begins the record of the Bible and is illustrated throughout the Scriptures in every detail until it is brought to a climax by John in the book of Revelation. Deliverance from the plagues of today. We must therefore learn the ordered process of intelligent spiritual thought, of true separation and purity, of definiteness and of identity with the divine, of an absolute system of metaphysics whereby we can prove all things, of the consequent multiplication and exaltation of all that is immortal, of the attainment of God's likeness, true manhood, the perfect consciousness of divine ideas, and finally we must understand, live, and love the finality and perfection of the divine plan, in which man is eternally safe and perfect, not because of his own efforts, but because of the scientific fact of the infinite grace of divine love. As we understand, live, and love the numerals of inspired thought and idea, we shall be enabled to deal intelligently through the threefold process of analysis, exposure, and destruction, with the channel of all false creative sense, the Nile, with the impurity of lust, the frogs, with the viciousness, indefiniteness, and tantalizing persistence of sin, the swarms of lice, flies, or beetles, with the animality and false power of idolatry, the boils and blains, with the cruelty, multiplication, and devastation of debased thought, the hail, with the darkness and the ignorance of man-made theories whose name is Legion, the locusts and the darkness, and finally, with the firstborn of Egypt, the pinnacle and essence of materialism and all that constitutes hell. When we are willing to devote time and thought to understanding and proving this holy spiritual, scientific, and metaphysical plan and design of the Scriptures, then we too, like the children of Israel, shall be delivered from the plagues of today, and shall be ready to go forward across the Red Sea of myriad mortal theories, into the wilderness where human hopes fail, but where the manna of today feeds every honest desire for good, until at last, with divine science and system, we enter the only promised land. We do not have to die in order to inherit it. We only have to think spiritually and exactly here and now, and put that thinking into practice in every detail of experience. Jesus said, "Whither I go ye know, and the way ye know." Thank God we do know the way, and it is an ordered spiritual and scientific way, a narrow way, but universally available to all men. This spiritual and scientific way knows no distinction between Jew and Gentile, Catholic and Protestant, Muslim and Hindu, but is forever available to all men who will give to it what they would give in order to succeed in any undertaking, real devotion of purpose and effort. Moreover, this way is not confined to the past or the future. It is always at hand and within us. Jesus' prayer is a promise, that they all may be one, as thou, Father, art in me, and I in thee, and they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that thou hast sent me. And the glory which thou gavest me I have given them, that they may be one, even as we are one.